I lead a faculty, grad, and staff ministry at Purdue University, and I teach adjunct courses in philosophy and comparative religions at IU University. I'm an author and a speaker. I'm a father and a husband. My fields of expertise are philosophy and theology, but first and foremost, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, seeking to make followers who make followers. I want to address today not philosophers per se, but everyone whose academic field intersects with philosophy or is affected by philosophy, which is just about everyone who has an academic field. Every professor is going to engage in philosophy. Philosophy has its own first-order areas of interest. We ask questions there like, what is real? How do I know what is real? And how should I then live based on what I know about reality? As someone who is persuaded that the Christian worldview and faith is true based on personal religious experience of God's transforming grace in my life, and also based on the evidence and reasons I see in favor of the Christian worldview, philosophy is an aid for me for the task of evangelism in the areas of apologetics and in polemics, those dual aspects that help us to defend the faith and also refute alternatives to the faith. But importantly, it is also an aid in the task of integration. Integration is a notion that I think has been lost in the academy amongst a lot of Christian professors, and it is something vital for us as disciples and apprentices of Jesus. I believe that the university is the single most influential institution shaping culture today. At the university, we train our future political leaders, doctors, lawyers, our educators, artists, journalists, scientists, and future professors, all of whom are involved in that massive opportunity to influence the future culture of every nation. The founder of one of the world's largest missions organizations and campus ministry organizations in the world said just before his death that if he had it to do all over again, he would begin with professors. And the reason is simple, really. If you can get the professor, then you get their classroom too for 30 years. It's exponential growth. It's not addition. As someone working both with professors as my job and also doing the work as a professor, I am constantly challenged with the notion of what it means and how I apply this notion of being a missional professor. And I want all the other professors that I work with to be missional professors too. But the moment I mention that, you see people start squirming in their seats because it conjures up all kinds of bad ideas. I think sometimes people have the conception that what that means is we need to just scrape the plate of all the introductory textbooks, say in Physics 101, and replace that with John 3:16 every day and in every way. And I can see how that would make them squirm. For one, that's ill-conceived. It's a naive notion of what it means to be a missional professor. And frankly, it signals a dereliction of duty for anyone who's really called to be in that field as a disciple of Christ, teaching physics or any other aspect there. It really isn't complicated, this notion missional professor. It's simple. We just have to ask the right questions. We begin by thinking like this. If Jesus had as his mission in life not to go to the cross, but instead to do your job, and he had your background and training rather than carpentry, he could do it. The question is, how would he do your job just a bit differently than you currently do it? In other words, it asks you to call into question the very notions of a job or an occupation in favor of a vocation or a calling. A calling under God, under a distinctly Christian worldview and life view. If you did that, how would that make things different? It is no surprise that the modern university developed out of Christian medieval Europe, where people used to say that theology is the queen of the sciences and philosophy is its handmaiden, where the sciences were broadly understood as all aspects of the fields of knowledge. So it's helpful if we think about this metaphorically in a picture like this. If you have a wheel where the central hub is theology and all of the diverse extensions, the spokes, represent the various academic disciplines like mathematics and biology and chemistry and language and history, and all of those diverse disciplines are glued together, as it were, by the glue of philosophy. This picture shows us how theology is the queen of the sciences and philosophy is its handmaiden, and explains in part why behind every PhD is a doctorate of philosophy in fields X, Y, or Z. Philosophy is absolutely foundational for every field in academics, and in particular for Christians who want to unite their fields into their Christian worldview. We need to be Christians who study philosophy and theology no matter what our academic vocation is, so that we can be fully formed, integrated missional professors. To give you some examples of the importance and relevance of integration, consider a psychology professor who studies identical twins, whose lives are lived in different environments, but whose behavior nonetheless resembles each other quite closely. That psychology professor might then wonder about the reality of free will, or whether there is a soul to ground such a thing as a faculty of free will, since after all, most psychology textbooks don't even talk about a soul, not even about the root word of psychology. But as a Christian, she believes that we have a soul, and if there is no soul, or there is no free will, then what is she to make of moral responsibility, of praise and blame? Or consider an anthropology professor who looks out at the landscape and discovers that there seems to be cultural diversity amongst the application of moral principles, and concludes that there is no moral law. There are no moral objective features in the world. But then struggles with the tension of that and the fact that she believes in a divine commander who issues divine commands, whose commands are grounded in God's moral character, causing her to rethink the reason she had initially for affirming moral relativism based on that cultural diversity thesis. Or consider those in the hard sciences like physics and chemistry and biology. As a scientist, you're often trained to explain the data by invoking all and only natural explanations. But as this scientist reflects more deeply on his faith, he realizes that he believes in an intelligent being, and an intelligent being who is also a designer, and so an intelligent designer, and wonders about the plausibility of a research program of intelligent design in the fields of chemistry or physics or biology, and wonders about why that intelligent design hypothesis seems to be ostracized. Maybe it's a certain philosophy of science that's the problem and not science itself. As he looks around, he realizes that other fields of science already invoke personal rather than purely mechanical or natural causes, like the SETI research program, Search for Extraterrestrial Life, or cryptology, or archaeology, or forensics, and wonders, maybe I want to practice that too. Maybe I ought to follow the evidence where it leads and practice an open view of science rather than a view of science that might be more consistent with an atheistic philosophy of science. The crushing weight of the secular outlook permeates and pressure cooks all the ideas that we have in the academy. It's very difficult to escape this aura of naturalism that seems to dominate our academic thinking today. I want to close by considering the words of the late philosopher and spiritual life writer Dallas Willard. Willard said that we must recapture a view of Jesus as an intellectually competent person who knew what he was talking about if we're going to flourish and succeed faithfully as followers and apprentices of Jesus. Being a missional professor is vastly different from being a professor who just so happens to be a Christian. Being morally different from the world in terms of how you relate to your students or your colleagues and how you perform ethics within your discipline is not all there is to say on the matter of what it means to be a missional professor.